It's safe to say that Craig Porter is the only person to have a residence hall named after him when he was still an SMSU student. Craig is the owner of Plasticert, a custom plastics manufacturing company located in Lewiston, Minnesota, a community of about 1,600, about 20 miles west of Winona. A Burnsville native, he was all set to attend another university when swim coach Don Palm came calling. He dove on the swim team his first 3 years, graduating in 1979 with a degree in electronic engineering technology. His degree took him to a number of places before he landed with Plasticert, a company that at the time had plants in Pennsylvania and Minnesota and was headquartered in Florida. The company was in financial trouble during the 2008 depression, and after the Florida and Pennsylvania properties closed, he made an offer and became the sole owner in 2011. And while Craig learned a lot in the classroom at SMSU, it was socially where he made even greater strides. I was a typical introvert, he said. What SMSU did was grow me as a young adult. I grew socially and gained confidence, and being on the swim team helped with that. Which brings us to how Porter Hall got its name. An influx of students his senior year necessitated opening an idle residence hall, and Craig was the RA. Most residence halls during the time were named by students. At our first dorm meeting, it came down to Frontier and Sunset Hall. I think they picked Sunset Hall. One of the students got up and said, "I'd just as soon call it Porter Hall." The vote was taken, and today it still bears his name. Craig is thankful to the university for his education inside the classroom and out, and is humbled by today's Alumni Award. He's the father of 4 grown children and the grandfather to 3.
Please help me welcome to the stage, from the class of 1979, CEO of Plasticert, Mr. Craig Porter from Winona, Minnesota.
Wow. Thank you for this. Yes, it is a little humbling. Being an engineering introvert, we don't typically end up in a situation like that. We end up being leaders, but as introverts, we really don't like being recognized or being talked about. So as such, I almost feel kind of guilty about being up here. I feel like I need to kind of come clean about something. My sophomore year, when I applied to be an RA, it really was for the free room and board. There, I feel better now. I am very honored and excited about this award. Really, I've been to a number of these ceremonies and heard these presentations, and even from some friends of mine, and very often they talk about the academics and the professors that guided them. And quite honestly, for me, I was pretty darn academic when I got here. Calculus, physics, even a couple of years of Latin. For me, Southwest was much more about being here and the things I encountered and things I did while I was here outside the classroom. I learned much, much more outside the classroom than inside. As an incoming freshman, I can't say enough about Coach Palm, Coach Ekstrom, and my swim team and dive brothers. That freshman year, that team went on to win its 3rd conference championship in a row and placed 6th in nationals. And I was a diver, but I wasn't that good of a diver. I was okay. Coach was honest with me and said, I'm there to take, the 5th or 6th or 7th points, get those points that were just laying there, because a couple of the other teams we usually competed against only had 1 or 2 divers. But in spite of that, my teammates always made me feel like I was just as much a part of that team as the All-Americans that we had. It was a huge boost in my confidence and really brought me a long ways in those first couple of years. So by the end of my sophomore year, I did apply, become a head resident for the free room and board, and managed to slip through the process. Come that next fall, when I arrived on campus, we went down to Lake Chetek for RA training, and that's really where I started learning and growing about service to others and being in a leadership type of position. So much so that that first year as an RA at Kama Sutra was huge for me. I bumped into a high school friend over at the mall in the spring, just by chance, and he was down here on business, and invited him over to campus. And we walked across campus and encountered people along the way saying, "Hey, Craig, how's it going? Craig, how you doing? How you doing, Craig?" And finally we got to Kama Sutra, and he's like, knowing me from high school and the way I was pretty introverted, "Do you know everybody on this campus?" And quite honestly, I said, "Well, I know a lot of them, but I think at this point they all know who I am." I never really thought about that transition that I'd made until preparing for this event and this talk. Earlier in June, we were up at the cabin, hosted graciously by Deb Morgan and her husband Dennis. And one of the nights, Deb asked me in a rhetorical question, "Porter, what's your favorite movie of all time?" Because she knew what the answer was. Back in the Southwest days, it was Saturday Night Fever. Saturday Night Fever came out in the winter of '77, that junior year, but which meant being in Marshall, I didn't see it until the summer after when I was up in the Twin Cities. But I came back to campus for my senior year all hepped up about this movie. And I drove Beth Connor, our director, crazy. But it wasn't the dancing and it wasn't the drama. It was the opening scene of Saturday Night Fever. I don't know if you remember it. Tony Manero walking down the sidewalk with that can of paint. But he wasn't walking. He was strutting. He called it strutting. And it's not a boastful thing. It's not a braggartly thing. It's a strut. And it shows confidence. And the light bulb went on for me that's what my first 3 years of Southwest State did, was gave me a strut. And I used that strut a lot from there on out. The story about the dormitory, Madam President, I'll help you out a little bit so you can avoid that incident happening in the future again. When I got the call in August to become the head resident of this dormitory coming out of mothballs, it didn't really occur to me. The light bulb didn't go on until after I said yes, that last minute registration being freshmen. Every other dormitory on campus has a distribution among the classes, but I had 32 freshmen and a couple of transfers. And so after, one of our first duties that first month was the name of the dormitory, because it hadn't been named yet. It had been in mothballs. And later on in the month, we had our first dorm meeting after they'd gotten acclimated and they'd gotten to know me. And here I am, they're RA, I'm a senior, and they're all freshmen. I'm on the swim team. Everybody on campus knows me. I drink scotch. Close your ears, Madam President. I sold them beer out of my refrigerator. By the bottle, 25 cents a bottle. It was a great deal. And I had this strut. So when we got down to the end and Mike Flynn stood up and said, "Sunset Hall's a stupid name, let's call it Porter Hall," I didn't directly affect the outcome, but indirectly, I guess I had something to do with it. So when I went down and pleaded my case to Beth, when I had to tell her about the name of the dorm, she was like, "What did you do?" And I'm like, "I didn't do it." But I guess in retrospect, indirectly, I guess I did have something to do with it. Later that year, my senior year, I was offered 6 different jobs as I graduated. Everything from the Twin Cities all the way out to Cleveland and even, Virginia Beach. And my GPA wasn't that great. I think it had a lot to do with the strut. The strut got me all those job offers. And that first job I started up in the Twin Cities only lasted for 9 months. I kind of got bored with them and I didn't like the place and moved on to another company I applied at. And then kept moving. I had 13 different company jobs over my career. The first one I applied for, the rest were all phone calls from recruiters or from friends or network saying, "Hey, we've got something really cool over here, why don't you come do it?" And I think all those phone calls were a result of the strut. Outside of work, my volunteer work really started out because my parents were big volunteers. Dad in the Shriners, my mom has always been very civic and church-oriented in her volunteering. The only volunteering I ever applied for was City and Planning and Zoning Commission, which I've served at the pleasure of the mayor for 15 years, but all my other volunteering, commissions, committees, task forces, clubs, you name it, were all people coming to me saying, "Hey, can you come and help us out?" And I think, because of the strut. And some of you know I officiate swimming and diving. Started out just officiating over my daughters, and then within about 4 or 5 years, I'm walking along in the pool with Michael Phelps and Ryan Lochte in the pool. And a couple of years after that, head deck referee for the state swimming high school championships. And there too, I think I escalated because of the strut. And then lastly, owning my own company. Ran it for 6 years, but got into the recession. Things were tough. Revenue was down. Cash flow was tight. The owner withdrew into a shell and kind of sized up the situation, did some finagling, did some deal making, and ended up buying the company because of, no, because who wants to look for a job at 55? The company was going under, and I had to save it. It was the lesser of two evils, looking for a job or buying the company. But the strut came into play as well. In light of all that stuff, really, my biggest accomplishments are my 4 kids sitting at that table and my grandkids. And I think the strut had something to do with that as well. But, so in really, yeah, Southwest did a lot for me. Some in the classroom, but as an engineer, a lot of that technology was old within a few years and and then out of date within 5. But outside the classroom, you truly did make me who I am, and I'm very appreciative for that and for this award. Thank you very much.